was here first was much taller than me. Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so happy to see so many folks here tonight. I'm Marianne Zalesnik, and I'm the news director at WVXU, and I am so excited to see all of you here. If you would have told me, I don't know, a year and a half ago that we'd have all kinds of people so excited to talk about the sewers and learn about the sewers, I wouldn't have believed you. I wouldn't have. Becca has had this idea to talk about the sewers for a while. In terms of just explaining what MSD is and how sewer combined overflows. Did I get that right? CS, sewer combined sewer overflows. I had it backwards. Work and all those sorts of things. And so we were planning on doing some news stories on it and maybe some web material on it as well. And then we found out that PRX, which is a producer of a lot of programming for public radio, was offering up a grant, and we could apply for it for a podcast. And Becca submitted the idea of the sewers. And so I said, okay, really? You want to do the sewers? And I was a little surprised. And it won, and I was thrilled, because it's a really important topic. I think we are learning, and so many people that are listening to the podcast have found out what a really, really important topic it is. So I am so glad that Becca and Ella have spent so much time putting this all together. I want to thank you again for being here. Thanks CET for hosting us tonight. So kind of our neighbors here at CET to let us use their facilities. If you need a restroom, you can go out that door that you came in, turn right, and then turn right again, and they're at the very end of the hall there. So if you need to leave for any reason, those are there for you. I'm sure most of you know. How many of you have been listening to the podcast already? Everybody been listening? Okay, look at that. And have you gotten through episode 6 today? All right. I know a couple people had some trouble and other people didn't know it was out yet, but episode 6, the very last one, is out. And it's really different. This whole podcast is different from anything that we've really done. We have a couple other podcasts. Maybe you've heard of Looking Up or some of the other podcasts that we have on Cincinnati Public Radio, but nothing quite like this. It has been thoroughly researched. It has been a great deal of time spent to put the whole thing together. And who has done it but our local government reporter, Becca Costello. Give her a hand. I am so thrilled with Becca's work, and those of you that want to know what's going on in the city, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody that knows more about what's going on in Cincinnati government than Becca, and the insides and outs. And it is true, I have had more than one council member tell me, if they don't quite get what happened at a council meeting, they will go read or listen to Becca's story to straighten them out. So I think that's pretty impressive. But she did not do this all by herself. Our podcast coordinator is Ella Rowen, and Ella has done all the wonderful editing work and got to be on the mic this time as well and do some of the interviews, I think a little bit of interviewing as well, and writing and putting it all together. They are a dynamic duo of a team and have just done amazing work to put this podcast together. It's taken longer than you might think, more than a year. When was it you guys first went to the...
You're stealing all my talking points.
I'm going to stop talking then. Becca's going to tell you how it all got started when she's talking. But it all started really with that grant that we got from PRX and a special program for getting podcasts going. So if you have a cell phone, we ask you that you turn the sound down, just in case. We are on Facebook Live, so please don't say anything that we would be embarrassed to have you say on Facebook Live. They'll be taking some questions and things later, so you can come up to the microphone here to ask your question if you'd like. And if you are watching the live stream, you can put your comments, questions, whatever, in the live stream, and we'll make sure we're monitoring that and we can get those asked. So I will stop talking now, and I will introduce the dynamic duo of Becca and Ella.
Thank you so much for coming. This is on, right? I can't hear myself at all, but I'm sure that's fine. Thank you for being here. This is kind of crazy. I've been working in radio a long time, but never done something quite like this before, so that's pretty cool. I figured Ella and I will just introduce ourselves a little bit, talk a little bit about where we came from. We're having like a strobe fest on the screen. I don't know what's going on with that. Sorry, Tana. So I'm Becca Costello. I am, as Marianne said, the local government reporter for WVXU. I'm from Cincinnati, or from close enough here, from Claremont County. Moved around a little bit for work. I worked in Indiana and then in Nebraska in public radio and television for a couple years, but moved back to my hometown in 2021 to take this job as a local government reporter. And it's, definitely my dream job. It's something that I've always wanted to do, and so I'm really thrilled and feel really lucky and privileged to be here and to be able to do this kind of work for my hometown. And also, it brought me to Ella, my friendship soulmate. That was I shouldn't have said
friendship
that. That was
soulmate?
weird.
No, yeah. No, it's okay.
Okay.
They know. They've listened, right?
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
I actually started at the station as a part-time board op, so I was on WVXU on the weekends, and then I got hired on as the podcast coordinator and a production assistant, and it was just full speed ahead. First week, I think the first week was when they told me about this grant, and they said, do you want to organize this? And I put together a pitch meeting presentation, got as many people there as we could, just writing down any ideas they had. There were a lot of other ideas, like Becca had, I think, some game show ideas too that got vetoed.
I have no memory of that. I'm sure I did. I'm sure they were great ideas.
But we narrowed them down to 3, and then we voted, and it was sewers all the way.
That's not true. We did vote.
I knew you were going to say that.
I came in second in the station-wide vote. Bootsy Collins was in first, but then he didn't call us back. So we're like, let's make a podcast about sewers. And here we are.
And we're so lucky. But yeah, it's been an amazing experience getting to work with Becca, obviously, and with our whole staff. Everybody's just been so supportive the whole time. So I feel really lucky.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this already, but why a podcast about sewers? It is something that we have been needing to cover more. Obviously, the consent decree is something that was being reported on long before I got back here to Cincinnati. But a lot of news like that, it's just one example of something that really got eclipsed by the pandemic. Eclipsed is funny because we just had an eclipse as well.
Hashtag looking up.
Ella, oh, by the way, Ella also does the Looking Up podcast. Maybe Marianne said that. But as happy as I am with the success of Backed Up, an episode of Looking Up is up to 120,000 downloads, I think, which is insane. So Ella is just extremely talented, and I'm really lucky that, she could make our project sound as good as that.
And Marshall Verbsky, who helped
Marshall
with Backed Up as well.
Where is
in the back?
He's in here.
I don't know where he is.
He's in the back.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Also, we have decided, obviously, every podcast we make from now on has to have the word up in it. So we're taking suggestions for that, fired up, on the up and up, something like that.
Held Up was one.
Held Up?
Yeah, about bank robberies.
Clearly, yeah. That's the next thing we got to talk about. Anyway, why sewers? So Marianne, I think, was joking oh, are you sure you want to make a podcast about sewers? And truthfully, I didn't realize I was pitching that I would make a podcast. This was a pitch for, hey, what should the station make a podcast about? And I was like, hey, I want to learn more about sewers. Somebody should do that. But since it was my idea, when we got the grant, they were like, great, Becca, you're going to Miami with Ella for a week, and you're going to research sewers, and you're going to make this podcast. And that was a whole year ago. So, we did a week of training with PRX in Miami in late July 2023. And we've really been, researching it since then. Obviously, it's not the only thing we've done. We had a few big local things going on since then. Like the railroad sale, which I felt like could have been its own podcast as well. So lots of other things, kind of doing our regular day jobs and fitting this in where we could. But it's definitely been a long process. I don't know if you want to say any more about the training or kind of what we got from that.
Yeah, so PRX, Public Radio Exchange, if you guys aren't familiar, they've worked on a lot of really popular podcasts like This American Life, Serial. Basically, any NPR-related podcast that you love has had some kind of relation to PRX. And their training was amazing. I think Becca said it's the best journalism training she's ever attended.
100%.
It really taught us how to tell a story in a way, how to deliver information in a way that people will actually want to listen to it. And I think with this podcast, that was really important because it's so information dense. And it's important. So we wanted to make sure people were really listening. And PRX gave us an amazing toolkit to make that happen.
I think too, the best thing that came out of that is, so we were in Miami with a cohort of like, I don't know, 8 or 9 other teams that were working on their own podcasts. And so we were there together doing all these exercises, figuring out what our ideas were, how we could work together on that, from all over the East Coast, basically, this part of the country. And what came from that, as Ella and I were talking about, and we didn't know as much back then as we do now, obviously, but talking about like the idea of a sewer podcast, and what some of the feedback we got was from people that said they were interested partly because Ella and I were telling it together in kind of a funny way, and we're like, okay, that's the key. Like that, we kind of latched onto that, and we're like, if that's what's gonna get people to listen, that's great. And I think that's one of the best things, because I hardly knew Ella way back then. It's so funny to think about. You know, you had started at the station in like March or April. We applied for the podcast in like May, found out in June. We're in Miami in July, and like in between that, like we just didn't have, you know, much reason to interact or anything like that. And now, we're besties.
Yeah, it's crazy too, because I was not planning to be a host at all. Originally, it was just going to be Becca.
Yeah, I'm really vain.
And our mentors at PRX said, actually, we think it would be cool if we kind of used your dynamic together, because sitting in meetings with us and seeing our friendship grow in real time, it's kind of crazy. Like, they witnessed that. And I mean, all of our coworkers have too. But we hit it off from the start. And actually, when I was a part-time board operator before Becca and I even met, it's like a ghost town at the station on the weekends. And there's nobody there, but I would always walk past Becca's door to go to the break room, and her door has a picture of her dog on it and a Cincinnati Library sticker, and I used to work at the library, so I sent her an email and just said, I don't know who you are, but you seem cool, I like your door, something along those lines.
The exact words were, the vibes are immaculate. I will never forget that, because it's the coolest thing anyone's ever said about me. And then she met me and she was like, okay, you're kind of funny, but I don't know about that.
No, and then I went to the holiday party as a part-time board op, not knowing anybody except for the other part-timers, and Becca introduced herself to me and then sat me down at a table full of people that I ended up working with full-time. So it's just, yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you.
I talked to her at the party because I knew she already thought I was cool, so like, you know, low anxiety, I don't have to worry about it. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the topic, which, you know, obviously it was new to me when I moved back. Like I said, I grew up near Cincinnati, but not in the MSD coverage area, not, you know, experiencing sewer backups or anything like that. So until I started working in Cincinnati, I really had no idea anything about this issue. But you know, as much as folks in probably our generation are maybe less aware, it's been around forever, and people have been working on it for a very, very long time. So my favorite thing, Marilyn Wall is here. I see her in the row there. She was the first person that I talked to, both off and on the record. You know, we had kind of a conversation. I said, hey, we want to do a podcast about this. What do you think? She gave so much information and history. It was super helpful. And then we did a couple of interviews with her as well. And then she said, hey, I think I have a VHS tape of something that we did with the Sierra Club way back in the 80s. You know, and she just kind of mentioned it offhand, and I said, I have a VCR, can you please find that and give it to me? And she did, and we have the VHS tape. We played some of the audio in, I can't remember which episode of the podcast, 3 or 4 maybe. So was so thrilled by that. Also, Marilyn, don't forget to take this when you leave, because I've been meaning to give that back to you. So we're actually gonna watch just a couple of minutes of that. And again, this was produced in the mid-'80s, so this was before, obviously way before the consent decree. But when there was still some public conversation about this, and that just tells you how long we've been dealing with this and talking about it. Ooh, spooky.
You have permission to dance.
I'm so glad I got a laugh.
This is the city of Cincinnati. Cincinnati was born as a river town in the 1700s. It developed as a city because of its location on the Ohio River. The river, providing transportation and fresh water, was the catalyst for the growth of industry and the influx of people. The river and its tributaries continue to serve us today. Barges travel the Ohio daily. Industries such as utilities, which generate electricity, use thousands of gallons of water a day. Over 1 million people living in and around the city rely on the river for drinking water. Recreational uses of the river, such as boating, fishing, and water skiing, are also very popular. Each year, thousands of people gather on the riverfront to celebrate Riverfest. The Ohio River is a major asset to the people it serves. But how do the people who benefit from the river serve the river?
I've been telling people that I would not personally swim in the Ohio River from about the Big Mac Bridge in Cincinnati downstream to about the lower 275 bridge. Just from the fecal coliform data I've seen, knowing all the limitations of fecal coliform, but the numbers that we got, I wouldn't personally swim in it.
Well, obviously there are health hazards involved with it. One of our favorite quotes came from the health commissioner, Dr. Brodnax, who
The whole video is, I think, like 20 minutes or so we're not going to watch the whole thing. But the music at the beginning there is just my favorite thing. It is so 80s, it's so good. We had a really great, in our early draft of the pilot episode, we had a really great little montage of some like 80s music and TV commercials, and like it had something about Kings Island in there. We ended up not using it in the final, which I think is such a shame. I probably should have brought it just to play for this.
We should post that online.
It was so good.
Kings Island's even better when you do it all together. We would sing that like
we would
every day.
And we had these little.
And
did we put the Cuyahoga bite in the Cuyahoga?
Oh
blah,
man,
blah,
I don't
blah.
know. I don't
Anyway.
think that made the final either. There's a whole other show just about the show that we need to make.
Yeah, I'm sure people would
Yeah.
care about that. Okay, so talking just a little bit about, Marianne touched on this, how long it took us to do this. It was a year. It wasn't every single day, all day, every day for a year, but it was a significant amount of time. And, I went back today and added up how many hours of interview tape we had, and it was about 28 hours of interview tape. And obviously we cut that down. The final podcast is about 3 hours across all the episodes, so that's still pretty long, but to, go from 28 hours to 3 is a lot of work, and so that took us a while, but I think it was necessary too for such a complicated topic like this. And I'll say too here, we'll do some thank yous at the end, but Deb Leonard is here somewhere. There she is. MSD Communications Director Deb Leonard, her voice is in the podcast, but she also coordinated all of our interviews with the MSD folks, and I was really happy and impressed with how open they were with us. They were a little skeptical at first, like, why are you making a podcast about this? This seems like a weird thing. You're giving us a lot of attention. But even with that and with those questions, the director, Diana Christie, did 2 separate interviews with us. I think we talked to her for a total of like a little over 3 hours, 3.5 hours. That's a lot of time, even for, obviously public officials are literally paid to do this. It is their job. So I hesitate sometimes to give them too many kudos for doing their job. But, that's a lot of time. It's one thing to say, yes, I'll answer your questions, and it's another to say, like, I'll come back multiple times and, to do all of this stuff that I think not all public officials would do. So I just want to recognize that, and Deb helped put all that together. So thank you, Deb. So we're obviously going to transition into some Q&A soon, but I thought we'd talk about what's next. Obviously, I can't remember. Raise your hands again if you were able to listen to the episode 6 of the podcast. Okay, so like half. That's great. We got it up a little late this morning, so no worries if you didn't. But yeah, so we talk a little bit about the future in that last episode and what some of the options are. But obviously the main thing is it's not over, of course. There are lots of unanswered questions. There are lots of possibilities. Even just technology might change over the next few decades. Hopefully it becomes easier and maybe even cheaper, God forbid. To fix some of these problems. Probably will only get more expensive, but you can hope, we can hope for that. But also talking a little bit about, what's next for us is I am going on vacation for a month, and I'm going to recover from making this podcast and then never make another podcast again because it was really exhausting. But no, in seriousness, like it was a big project. The point of the grant was partly for us as a station to learn, how do we build a podcast from the ground up. Which, we had done with Looking Up when Ella came in, and maybe you can even talk about this a little bit. We had Looking Up as a podcast here, but it got kind of relaunched with a new vibe and a new kind of mission and focus. But the part of the goal was, okay, how do we figure out what it takes to like build something from the ground up? And the answer is a lot. So, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about, what's interesting is, I keep saying, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about, and then I keep talking and not letting you talk. I think it's interesting, like I'm really glad that Ella and I got to work together on this. And now that we're done, like we really kind of go our separate ways in the company. I mean, it is a very small place, and my office is right by the break room, so I see everybody all the time. But,
You're witnessing our last conversation right now, actually. It's really sad. No, you shouldn't laugh.
Ella's like, thank God, I don't have to talk to her anymore. But yeah, like this was unique for us in the sense that like we kind of were working across departments, and that's not something that we do typically with other projects, and so I think that's a big lesson learned. But anyway, I'm gonna shut up and let you actually talk now.
Yeah, this was huge for our station, and like Becca said, it was us learning how to make a podcast at this scale. So I think my next steps as podcast coordinator here is just going to be like reviewing what went well, what didn't go well, maybe writing everything down in one big list. There's going to be some of that. And also seeing, we've been doing a lot with looking up, and again, thanks to Marshall Verbsky, who's in the back here. He originally, since Becca brought that up, he was the one who rebooted that show in a new format, and it's just done fantastic. And we co-produced that show. So I think we're going to take some of the things we learned from PRX and apply it to some of our other stuff, and just try to keep making really great things that connect with Cincinnati. Yep.
We're going to move into Q&A in just a second. So if you have questions and are willing to head up to our microphone and let us know your name and what the question is. And while you're thinking about your many, many amazing questions so that we don't sit here in awkward silence for the next half hour, I will just tell one story I just remembered, which was a communications person that worked for the city. This was a while ago. Actually, this is so funny because Virginia Talent was the person that I was interviewing. This was like 3 years ago, and the communications person who set it up, we sit down, I got my microphone set up, we're gonna do the interview, and she said, so is this like a podcast for the radio? And I was like, no, it's just radio. Like, we were here before podcasts. Like, it's not like a podcast, but for the radio. But now here I am doing a podcast, so anyway. Yeah, questions? Oh, and I should have said too, we did mention since we are live streaming and we've got possible questions in the comments, this is Jen Merritt, our digital editor and deputy editor in the newsroom. So she's been monitoring the comments, and when we have questions through there, she'll ask them in the microphone.
Yeah, so we're actually taking them, so please submit them. And this one comes from Leslie Michael. She wants to know if there was a backed up bonus episode, what content would it cover?
Oh, I would say the treatment plant tour, for one.
Yeah.
We had so much great audio from touring the treatment plant that we just didn't have time to get into the show.
Yeah. So we took a tour of the Mill Creek wastewater treatment plant, which is the largest in the MSC system. Deb was there that day and walked us through. We had a great photographer, Jeff Dean, who you've seen some of his photos up in the slide today and on the website. And it was really cool, and also like freezing cold. It like kind of snowed, like sleeted a little bit that day, so it was kind of funny to go through that. But it was really cool. I mean, that would be, in terms of like the content that we already have that we could put together as a bonus episode, that would be one. In terms of like all the other questions that we still have, that could be like, a million other episodes. We mentioned in the last episode that we really only are covering one part of water quality. There are so many other ways that water can be and is currently polluted. Also, something I didn't know until we started researching was how much this is happening all over the world. Combined sewers, it makes sense because we talk about this as a thing that exists in older cities before newer technology was available. So, all of Europe was built before all of the US was, and they all have combined sewers. Also interesting timing in that the Olympics is happening in Paris this year, and the Seine River is heavily polluted with combined sewer overflow. So it just obviously could not have predicted that, but interesting timing with that. So I think there's a million different ways we could go with this. We also toyed with some, early on trying to decide what direction to go in. Stormwater was originally not part of our plan for the podcast, but it became really obvious very quickly, actually in that first interview with Marilyn, that we needed to talk about stormwater, as both a separate thing and something that overlaps so much with this. So that really shifted that direction. But we talked about, private septic. That's a whole other can of worms, and something that has come up in local government as well. We interviewed a professor, I can't remember the university he's from, not a local university.
I think Arizona.
Oh, I thought it was like South Carolina.
Oh.
It's not here. Anyway, he is a researcher and looks at like access to sanitation in some more rural parts of the world, as well as parts of the United States, and talks about how important it is to have access to that as a public health issue. And that was outside the scope of what we could handle, but I think that would be a really interesting direction to go in as well. I mean, I could just list like a million other things. It really is amazing how complicated and overlapping all of this is. So I think there's a lot we could have talked about.
Yeah, and I think every field interview we did on location could have been its own podcast. North Fairmount in particular, just walking around, talking to people, seeing some of the damage, that was pretty mind-blowing to me.
Yeah.
And also, talking about history again, I think Jack Rennekamp, who was our sewer historian throughout the show, should just have his own podcast, and he would do amazing, and he wouldn't even need us.
100%. Is he here? Is Jack here? Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Well, we miss him. We loved that. The other one I'll say is Reese Johnson, who said he couldn't be here tonight from MSD. People loved him. Like we got so many messages from people being like, "Oh man, he really explained things really well. Like that was really interesting."
And just they loved his voice.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. Other questions? Dead silence while you walk up to the microphone.
I'm Brad, longtime listener, first-time caller.
This is my father.
So you mentioned that this is a problem in many locations, of course, and I thought your Instagram on that was particularly good. But I'm wondering what that means for the shelf life of the series, given that you clearly were threading the needle of serving the community with a topic that meant a lot to Cincinnati, but could also mean a lot for other communities. So in radio, in traditional radio, with the last episode, the story would have been done, or largely that it would all be, the listenership would be written and everything else. But this feels more like a beginning now that it's all in one place and so many people can listen to it. So I'll take my answer offline.
That's a really good point, and I think that's a good example of a sort of mindset shift that I had to go through. Coming into this as a radio reporter, and it's not that we do breaking news often, in public radio. That's not really kind of our deal. But it is like short term. The longest I'd ever spent on a story before was like a month maybe, and that felt like ages. Everything is more immediate, it's more pressing, it's more, okay, what's the timeliness of this? And this felt like a very different kind of mindset for that reason. And we also talked a lot about like, okay, how much of a shelf life do we want this to have? We were talking in some cases about things that were actively happening. So like, for example, we interviewed the North Fairmount folks, and they said, we're trying to get the city to approve this grant for this pilot program. And we interviewed them about 2 weeks before City Council voted on the budget. Of course, by the time the episode came out, they had voted on the budget, and it wasn't in the budget. So, we talked about that, but there were certain things about it that were happening kind of in real time. The other one is the stormwater fee, which they keep saying is happening any day now. And that was kind of a frustrating thing for a long time, because that episode was actually supposed to be episode 2, I think, or maybe 3.
Yep.
And that's how we had kind of mapped out the series, and I was like, well, let's just push it back and see, maybe that'll give them enough time to get something together.
And the script just kept getting longer, because we're like, okay, we'll do it later. We'll put it in episode 5.
That's why the last episode is like 40 minutes long. So yeah, we had to consider, like, do we want this to be more immediately interesting for what's happening right now? Or do we want this to be more of like an explainer that somebody can listen to a year from now or 2 years from now and still get something from? And I think we kind of tried to strike some middle ground on that. The other thing that brings up too is this idea of, did we want this to be a podcast for Cincinnati, or, try to get more of like a national audience for that? And one of the things that we took from our PRX training was that this obviously has applicability, honestly internationally, because it is an issue internationally, but we wanted this to be a Cincinnati podcast. This was for our Cincinnati audience, and not necessarily our radio audience, but just for the people who live in Cincinnati. And that's why we were really specific about the things that are really unique to Cincinnati, like the 1968 agreement. That's not something that Paris has. We really wanted to make sure it was specific to our local audience. And that was a decision we made that, I think was the right one.
Yeah, and PRX also encouraged us to go as niche as possible on certain things, because I just think it's more interesting, and I feel like I would rather listen to a show about a small town I know nothing about than a show about everything all at once. Well, there's a really good movie close to that title, so I don't know, but yeah, so I think we really embraced the niche idea, and also I think this was a really cool experiment to sort of introduce people to a story that maybe they wouldn't have clicked on that article on our website, but they would listen to this podcast. And now, because they've heard it and they know the issue, when they hear about things that are going on regarding the sewer system, they're going to want to click that article now, or they're going to maybe see what else Becca's reporting on. So it's just another way to reach a new audience.
Other questions? Yeah. I do just want to point out quickly, if you have not noticed Ella's toilet paper earrings, I want to make sure those get some recognition. Can we have a little commotion for the earrings?
Thank you. It's over, not under.
Hi, I'm Dwayne. First off, I just have to appropriately praise you two, because it was such a fantastic podcast.
Thank you.
My job these days has me in the car a lot, so I kind of listen to podcasts all the time. And I was thinking about, when it popped up, I was thinking about this one called Thirst Gap, about the Colorado River. And it was really well done, great podcast. You all really smashed that, because there was so much personality and your interaction and the way you edited the in and outs. I mean, how many of you caught yourself laughing out loud while you were listening to, right?
Thank you so much.
Totally. And I just have to appropriately praise you for that. I have two questions. I'll give them both so that I can sit down and not have people look at me while you answer one of them. So the first one is, I'm a policy wonk, and I'm interested in all that kind of stuff. Are there areas that there was a little more hesitance to be forthcoming about some of the details and down to the nitty-gritty of how the agreement worked, and some of the other clear lawyering that you left out of it? That, I'm kind of interested in if there were places where there was a little more like, do you need to file information request for this or something? And then on the other side, the second question is, by training, historically I'm a teacher, and social studies teacher, history, government, all that fun stuff. And your podcast was perfect for like a multi-genre project. Something that if you really want to get kids into local history and to seeing what's going on around them, to truly bring history to life. Your topic fascinates me because students tell me that I'm like obsessed with sewers. Especially
Really?
like in the ancient world.
After this, yeah.
In the ancient, look, you go to the ancient world, I've had a chance to take kids overseas in Italy, and I'm pointing out all of the sewage and the water systems, and they're like, you're crazy. I was like, no, otherwise it would be a big hole that nobody wants to go to. So it caught me, but I would be interested in if you ever thought about taking what you learned from PRX and what you've learned in building out this podcast, and would you ever be willing to put together like how someone would do a mini podcast in the ways you hit really key points, like what might that look like, sound like? What would be the 4 or 5 big things you would tell a kid to do that for a project? Because you hit so many angles to bring it to life, you surely had some revelations while you were doing that, and I would love to hear that too. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to answer that second question?
Yeah. So we actually had the opportunity to speak with a high school classroom about this show. I guess it was about a month or 2 ago now. It wasn't as formal. I think it would be really cool to do something like that in the future, maybe like putting together an actual toolkit that they can take home with them. But we did a short presentation, and Kava Whitaker, who is her last name is Whitaker, right? Yeah. Okay. Kava Whitaker's our community coordinator here at CPR, and she does a terrific job, and she puts together all of our high school meetings and field trips and stuff. So I do want to talk to her about putting something together like that, because it was a really cool experience, and I think high school students especially are really interested in this exact kind of podcasting, like the investigative journalism.
That group of students too had, like, they were in the early stages. I think this was like the first day of whatever program they were doing, but they all had ideas for podcasts that they were working on, and one is about the frog man, the Loveland frog man. And like when they said that, Elle and I were like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah,
like,
we're like, have you done
so
any interviews
excited
yet?
about that.
Can we hear them? Also, there was another guy who his project was going out on the street and asking people what Pokemon they are and their political views.
Yeah, I want to know if he's done any of that yet.
And I want to know what his findings are.
Yeah, I don't know if that's considered empirical research. Don't know how trustworthy that is. So for the first question, first of all, I think Marianne is still here, and I think she should fund a trip to Italy for our second season of Backed Up. Just saying, I would do another season if that was happening. I'm sure that'll be in the budget. Yeah, okay, so there were definitely things that were like too wonky. So there were things that were too wonky that like we never even attempted to like put in the podcast or to script. There were other things. I think the example I can think of right now is, so in episode 2, we talked about like the fight between the city and the county, and they came to this agreement to do something, and then it all fell apart. And I think the way we described that in that episode was they had to ask for the state's permission, and the state said no, and that was a big bummer. And that is such a simplified like explanation of what actually happened. And I had started writing about the pension fund and all of that and why that was part of it, and we ended up taking it out because it was just like, this is too distracting. Like that's not really what this episode is about, and it takes us too long to get to like what really matters next in the story. But we ended up bringing it back for the last episode, which I wasn't sure that we would, but it just made sense in the script. And even then, like, we explain it a little more, but it is still a pretty watered down version of what happened. And that's, honestly, as a journalist, is kind of terrifying sometimes, is like, you have to make it in terms that people can absorb and understand, but there's always a danger of like getting something wrong, or even just like kind of unintentionally implying something that you didn't mean, because if you're not laying out every single fact, in a row, it can change things. And I think we're careful about that, and obviously we have editors look at things and try to make sure we don't go in the wrong direction. But it's funny too, because I think with this issue in particular, in the newsroom, it's something that everybody else in the newsroom was really knowledgeable about. So, we would hear things like, and I'm not saying this to like call out anybody specifically, but it's like, okay, yeah, sewer backups, everybody knows what that is.
And then I would say, not me, not I. I'm not in the newsroom. So yeah, I came at this from a sound design perspective, and I learned a lot about ethics in journalism and running things past Becca, and making sure, like, does this sound good? Like, is this okay,
But it was a good reminder too of like, I think about this all the time, because normally I'm at City Hall and like reporting on City Council and stuff, and there are so many things that I'm like, okay, yeah, obviously XYZ, I understand that now, and it's hard to remember when I didn't understand all of that, and that's where we have to be to write a story like this, because nobody else has spent, what did I say, 30 hours in interviews about this, so it's not obvious. But it's hard to remember what you used to not know. There's something like that.
There's a moment
Come up with an acronym for that.
There's a moment we have recorded from way back, like I think it was month 2 or 3, and I was completely new to the topic, knew nothing, still learning every day, and like we had been talking about combined sewers for at least a month at that point, and I realized I still had no idea what they were, and it only got through to me when Becca said, "Big rain poop pipe." And and I always think that, and it's like, okay, the rain and the poop are in the same pipe. See, and I think that's the special thing I brought to this podcast is, like, I speak for all the people out there who don't know what's going on, and I tried to edit it for them, like for people like me, yeah. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Ella. Other questions, anybody? Feel free to line up.
This is my hero, Marshall Verbsky, by the way, co-producer on Looking Up.
I'll do a quick one.
Also, yeah.
Thank you.
Also played the voice. He read that old article. In,
Oh, yeah, the
in that
article
transatlantic accent.
The transatlantic.
Do you want to do a recreation so people recognize it?
Extra. I won't ask my question in that accent.
No, you can if you want.
No,
No, because I would not be able to think of what I was trying to say. I'll keep it quick, and I've already forgotten what I was going to say.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Oh yeah, so I want to look at it, kind of the future, what's after this podcast. You guys talked about for like your personal, jobs, but as someone who is now very invested, far more invested than I ever wanted to be in the state of Cincinnati's sewer system. I'm sure that you guys covered this in episode 6 a little bit, but for the few of us, thank you all so much for listening to episode 6 already. That's awesome. I've been working all day, so I haven't been able to listen to it yet. I should have done it during lunch. But what's next in terms of local votes that are happening? What can I look out for that could actually, within the next year, give us some positive change? And then, so that's my short-term future question. And then my long-term future question is, after you guys are done with like recovering from this incredibly meaty project, do you think you'd ever revisit it? Do a backed up 2 when in 20 years or 5 years, it's, still backed up number 2. Revisit it in the same form and give updates on the newly fixed sewer system. So,
Thank you.
In terms of what's next for the project and for the consent decree, the phase 2A of the consent decree is supposed to be finished by the end of this year. So those are projects that are currently ongoing. Phase 2B of the consent decree was recently submitted to the federal regulators with the EPA, and they are now negotiating that with the county officials that submitted that plan. So the plan there is to build what's called high-rate treatment plants, just one in the next phase, but it's a facility that basically only operates when there's a lot of rain, otherwise it just kind of sits there. There was a public comment period for that, but that has passed. The deadline for them to submit to the regulators was June 30th, so that obviously has already gone by. But the other thing, and the thing that I think is the most open for public involvement, if that's what somebody's looking for, is the stormwater fee, the impervious surface fee, which we are intentionally not calling a stormwater fee for reasons explained in episode 5. But that is something that, if and when it does eventually come to commissioners, they will consider public comment on that, and there will be a period where people can, submit their opinion in writing or can come speak to commissioners that, looks different ways. And that is a thing that, even though it's been in consideration for at least 3 years, it will take a very long time still to continue forward. So that's probably the thing that is the most immediate in terms of local issues. But yeah. I don't remember the other question.
Backed up number 2.
Oh, no. Just kidding. Yeah, I think definitely the topic should be revisited at some point. Like, I'm not going to commit to making another podcast 5 years from now. But yeah, I think that is what's frustrating, not to like make this all about my existential crisis about the state of local journalism, but that's pretty much all I think about all the time.
Buckle in.
Buckle up.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. It's tough because, you know, you spend a lot of time with an issue like this, and I'm like, okay, I recognize the importance of this, and I want to keep following it and making sure we're staying up on it. But there are 100 other issues just like this that nobody's reporting on right now. And it's not because people don't care, it's because there are a fraction of the number of journalists that we used to have. And that's, of course, not just unique to Cincinnati. That's happening all over the country, which, you know, compounds it and makes it an even worse problem. So it is tough to think like, okay, do we dedicate our limited resources to following this particular topic that is, of course, very important, or do we try to cover 5 other topics a little bit? You know, those are the decisions that we're kind of thinking about all the time, and there's not really a right answer, but those are the kinds of factors that would go into a decision like that, I think.
There were so many times, especially when we were recording on locations in Cincinnati, where we would run into some other kind of infrastructure and think, oh man, wonder what that podcast would be like. Just like talking about local transportation. I think that was the topic that kept coming up just with the people we were interviewing. So there's so many things we could talk about and not enough time.
Just as I know there's questions, I'm sorry. I just love to hear myself talk. What was so interesting is I live in East Price Hill, and obviously our station is downtown, so I drive down the 8th Street Viaduct pretty much every day to get to work. And it was so weird in the last like 9 months, not realizing how much major infrastructure I drove by every single day and just had no recognition of it. So the Mill Creek Barrier Dam, I drove past every day, and I was like, what is that? That's a weird looking building. Never Googled it, like I just didn't know what it was. On the other side, the Mill Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant that we got to tour eventually. And I would drive under the Cincinnati Southern Railway Bridge that goes over the Ohio River. And those are like, the treatment plant and the railroad are like all I've thought about for a year. So but it was so weird that like I spent 3 years driving right through that and had no idea it was right there. So then it's like, okay, what else do we not recognize? You know, is some critical infrastructure that we just don't think about. Okay, I'm done. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just gonna tiptoe. All right.
Will's coming up.
My name's Addison, and thanks. For the last episode, you went over financial and political solutions, but I was also wondering if you had come across other types of solutions, maybe biological or something like that, that was interesting but would distract too much in an episode. And I was just wondering if you have come across any like sort of research along those lines.
That's a really good question.
Thank you. One Water.
Yeah, you want to talk about that?
I think you would probably talk about it better. Yeah.
So the professor I mentioned that didn't end up in the podcast introduced this concept of One Water to us, which interestingly, we said that phrase in front of Jack Rennekamp once, and he was like, oh, don't talk about that. People are going to be freaked out about that. It turns out there's a separate, like, politicized One Water that I wasn't aware of, and we were talking about this other One Water thing, which is basically,
There's 2 waters, as it turns out.
There's 2 One Waters. Basically, it's this idea that the way it works here and most places is, so we send all of our poop and rain to MSD, they treat it, and then they release it into the Ohio River. Completely separately from that, Greater Cincinnati Water Works pulls in water from the Ohio River, treats it, and then sends it to our taps and our toilets and whatever else. And it does beg the question, like, how can we not just do that all at once? Like, we're sending that water anyway, we're treating it anyway, why can't we just, clean it up and send it right back? And the answer is that there are places that are doing that and attempting to do that. Some, I can't remember off the top of my head. Some that are in kind of like trial pilot phases, and some that are, just doing it. It is a more pressing issue in some places in the world where water is less plentiful, and it's really a resource scarcity issue. But that's probably going to be an issue for all of us eventually with climate change, is resource scarcity. And so that is definitely something that I think makes a lot of sense. But we talk about how expensive it is to fix the combined sewers. I can only imagine it would also be very expensive to try to combine. Also kind of ironic to separate the combined sewers and then combine it with drinking water. But yeah, that's one example. But there are also just really interesting things we learned about what stormwater management utility and MSD are doing, like with newer technologies. Like we did talk about smart sewers, and that was pretty cool. But even things about like Diana Christie said at one point, like our sewers are fine if we maintain them. Like yes, they're really old, but if we take care of them, they really are fine. Except that they're combined, but that's like a separate issue. But as long as they're being maintained, and so there are ways that, so lots of people in the podcast are here today, by the way, if you want to meet some celebrities. I'm looking at Eric Saylor from Cincinnati SMU. He described, and I'm probably going to totally butcher this explanation, but was describing the way that they can line old pipes. So instead of digging it up, replacing the entire pipe, which would be extremely expensive, the way that I remember talking about this is you basically like put a bunch of like, you know, like, I don't know, rubber or something, like a balloon, and then you blow it up and it lines the inside of the pipe, and then it will last for another however long. There's a much better explanation and science behind that and technology, but it was just really cool to learn about. And so there were lots of things like that that we learned about that, you know, not necessarily relevant to the podcast, and so we just kind of skipped over that. But also the hamster ball thing.
Yeah.
You can talk about that.
Yeah, it's called a roly-poly. This just stuck out to me because it had a funny name. But no, it was like this camera that they put in the sewers that's spherical, and it kind of rolls through. Yeah, Deb Leonard and I think Reese.
Yeah, Reese was describing that.
Were the ones who showed us that.
With a GoPro in it, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's, you know, like you can roll it along and see where the problems are, and then you know where to dig instead of digging up the whole pipe again.
And of course, there's the interactive map that can tell you.
The overflow map?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I remember when Reese told us about that, he was like, "You guys want to see my party trick?" And he pulled out his phone and.
Oh no.
He was going to show us.
That wasn't the map. He said, my party trick is I can pull up the sewer system on my phone. And he's like, I can see like all this inner stuff. And then it didn't work, so it was not very impressive. I was like, ooh, I can't wait to do that. That's going to be great for the podcast. And then it didn't happen. I think it was a Wi-Fi.
I had a great time.
We have more questions. Come on up.
Hi there, my name's Rahul Desai, and I'm bringing you the obligatory connected communities question.
Woohoo!
So
I forgot that. That's the other thing I've been thinking about for 9 months. Thank you for bringing that up.
Amazing. So some people believe that connected communities will increase our impervious surfaces. If the fee doesn't pass, what advice would you have for developers or even homeowners to mitigate some of the problem on their own without waiting for a regulatory solution?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, also connected communities is a can of worms too, so that's a whole thing. So the concept here being that, of course, like impervious surfaces send stormwater into the combined system, and when there's a lot of rain, it can overwhelm it. So there's two sort of things here. One, heavy rain is a climate change problem. With climate change, we are getting more frequent heavy rain events. A solution for reducing the effects of climate change and reversing how bad we're making climate change is for people to live in more dense environments. So that's one connection there, that it's like, okay, yes, an apartment building with a parking garage is more impervious surface than 50 single family homes with a yard. But that's not the only consideration there, right? Like climate change is also, we have to think about all of the cars that we are using to drive from our single family home to our job or whatever. Again, we're simplifying very complex issues there, so I apologize if I'm glossing over anything too much. I will say that, so the stormwater fee, or the impervious surface fee, that is a proposal for MSD. There is already a stormwater fee in Cincinnati and some other communities, and so I see it on my water bill. It's based on the amount of impervious surface, so that's something that already exists. Actually, I don't know, Eric, you can just nod or shake your head. Are there like credits that homeowners or like property owners can do to reduce their stormwater fee in Cincinnati?
Not in Cincinnati.
Not in Cincinnati. That's a part of the MSD proposal that potentially, I think at first they're planning not for homeowners, but for like a parking lot or someone with a larger property, that they could do things like put trees in their parking lot or put a retention pond there or whatever else, things that are gonna reduce how much stormwater they're sending into the system, and as a result, they would have to pay less for that stormwater fee. So those are definitely things, but in terms of like getting actual credit for that, not sure. Also, when you're talking about like developers, like, are they gonna do something if they're not getting a credit for it? Probably not. That said, you know, Cincinnati does have, for part of Connected Communities, and I'm gonna hopefully remember this, there was a part of it based on human scale development, and it had to do with like requiring more trees on a development. So things that, you know, are not necessarily designed specifically to mitigate stormwater, but will have that effect. So those are definitely things, and you know, if you're thinking like on an individual basis, like how can I send less stormwater to the system? My across the street neighbor actually just messaged our neighborhood chat about this. Actually, he has a newsletter. It's the nerdiest, most amazing thing that he types out and puts on all the neighbors' doorsteps once a month. And anyway, he talked about it in this newsletter. He has like a garden that and some backyard chickens, and he's building little swales in his yard to direct stormwater away from his house and the neighbor's house. I can't do that, you know. I'm excited that people are doing that, but I don't know how to do that, but people do. And, you know, it's something that there is more and more information online to find stuff like that, so that's pretty cool. Yeah. I forgot the question. I'm like running on little sleep. May I please introduce to thunderous applause, Marilyn Wall, the person, which just as a reminder, Marilyn is the person, the only named person on the consent decree lawsuit. So brought forward the lawsuit with the Sierra Club that led to the consent decree.
And Sierra Club.
And the Sierra Club, sorry, yes.
On the suit. Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Well, my question is, I want to thank you for taking a lot of complicated, detailed, controversial information and making it understandable and funny. That was really great. So my real question is, in doing the podcast, if you want to talk about this, is how did you feel about how it might impact the community or politicians, if this will change ideas or the approach to addressing some of these complicated problems in our city?
I hope it does. You know, that's always the hope. And that's something that's like really hard to gauge. Like we don't ever really know. Usually we put our reporting out there and then hopefully people read it and it matters. I can only speculate, but there are things that I think maybe happened because we were asking questions, like meetings that, you know. So for example, when I approached Denise Driehaus, Hamilton County Commissioner, about this, and I had kind of really short meeting with her before we did a recorded interview, and I explained what this was about, and we talked to her because she's the only current commissioner that was around when the kind of kerfuffle with the city and the county was happening. I explained all that, and she said, yeah, you know, we had this whole plan, and that reminds me, like, it's been a while since we've kind of followed up on that, so I need to contact the mayor's office and blah, blah, blah. You know, that's a small thing, but I think because we were asking questions, some conversations happened that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And you know, was that worth a year of my life? Hopefully. I'm being silly there, but I do think that if all that happens because of this podcast is that people understand sewer and stormwater infrastructure better, I think that's successful. You know, it really changed the way I think about the world. Like that sounds really dramatic, but I think it is just I don't know, it kind of changed my frame of view, and I hope that's true for other folks as well. Obviously it's different to, you know, listen to 6 episodes versus like, you know, be there in person and see all of that, and that does make a big difference. I think, like, you know, we talked so long about how to describe CSO5, which is the like pit thing, the abyss thing. We went through so many versions of describing what that was in audio because
it looks like a castle. Ella, no, it doesn't look like a castle. It looks like a dungeon. No, Ella, it doesn't look like a dungeon.
And we had like we've been working with Ella's sister Leslie, who is doing her dissertation right now, right? Mm-hmm. And she's been helping us edit the scripts. And so we put together that description, and then we said, okay, tell us what you think that looks like based on what we said. And she like did a little drawing, and it was nothing remotely like what it actually looks like. Great, literally back to the drawing board. So I mean, that's just kind of a silly example of like it is different to, you know, listen to it and hear the distilled version versus like seeing it in person. So I'm sure it's not quite as impactful to listen to it as it is. But I you know, I don't think we'll ever know if like real policy changes as opposed to this, but like I really think with this MSD stormwater fee thing, it's the kind of thing I would have reported on, you know. I mean, I have reported on it in the past, even before this podcast. But I think, you know, if more people just understand it better and are even just following the news, even if they're not participating in it, I think that's a success.
And I think it's impactful just to know where you live, and like what Becca said about driving past the Western Hills Viaduct and the treatment plant every day, and now looking at that and knowing what it actually means for the city, knowing how many people are working to make it possible for all of us to flush the toilet. It's really cool. And in Cincinnati too, I told my partner, I feel like working on this podcast, it got to a point where I felt like Cincinnati's like a fictional world like that I live in, you know, and I'm seeing Easter eggs everywhere. Like I see a manhole that says MSD, and I'm like, whoa, just like the book.
In real life.
But it's really cool. It just makes life more exciting when you know where you live. And you go down those rabbit holes. So it doesn't even, I think it's obviously going to be impactful as far as local government goes, but it's impactful just, I think, for listeners who enjoy the show to know more about the city they live in, even if they haven't been, you know, news junkies in the past.
We have time for a few more questions if we have. Yeah, come on up. Or you can just come up and say what your favorite acronym was through the whole series.
Hello, my name's Nick. I didn't know I was going to follow Maryland, or I would have got up early.
Too late.
If you do season 2, it needs to be backed up to Sewer Boogaloo. I'm just. But I really enjoyed your banner at the end of the thing. I enjoyed you singing the little like sewer song at the end. It was really funny. That's not what I came up to say, but with PRX and like cross-pollination of podcasts, I know you're not planning on doing another podcast, but have you considered reaching out to like 99% Invisible? Like that podcast, for anyone who doesn't know it, is about the built world and infrastructure and how maintenance is super important. So they do highlight shows. I just thought it might be interesting, not necessarily having to do another season, but, you know, putting it more on a national spotlight. I think they're with Stitcher, but I figured you might know about them. So.
Yeah, we've actually, I think, already kind of gotten an offer to maybe do some stories, but we shouldn't say what.
With 99PI?
No, different one.
Oh, okay. Oh, I missed that memo.
You know. But
yes, yeah. They haven't emailed me back.
Yeah. But yeah, I think there's going to be opportunities for sure. I'm definitely going to be submitting backed up to podcast festivals, and then, and then also I'm thinking about trying to find some moments to send to podcasts like 99% or This American Life for some kind of feature there. We've also already been featured in, I think, 3 different newsletters, so that's really exciting. Email newsletters are really popular right now, and one of the best ways to discover new podcasts. So yeah, we're not done promoting. We've got lots of promoting to do still.
And we've been pretty lucky too that NPR has featured Backed Up on their podcast app and on their homepage today, actually, which is pretty cool. So.
Yeah, actually, looking up and Backed Up the whole last 6 weeks, I think. Well, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. But both of our podcasts have been recommended episodes by editors from NPR, and Backed Up has been in the new and noteworthy section. So that's really exciting.
It's pretty cool, I guess.
Question about the production process. Just given that you have, so you're obviously spending time carving up the interviews that you've done and writing the script and everything, but there's also the fact that you've recorded in so many different environments under, I assume, less than ideal conditions at several times, but the end product is incredibly smooth, and nothing is jarring in it, when you transition to hearing someone or anything like that. So what does that process look like for you as compared to the time to actually interview and everything, to actually assemble these? And then, of course, you're throwing in other clips that are funny or highlight a particular point and things like that. So what does that look like, and how do you get it to come out sounding that smooth?
Yay, my plan worked to make it sound good. As far as restoring audio, there's several different tools and techniques there. I think especially with all of the audio that was at the CSO5 location with that running water, that was the most difficult episode for me. Just trying to make anything we said sound like you could hear it without absolutely bursting people's eardrums. So yeah, I don't want to get too nerdy about all of that, but just a lot of, it's hard not to, it's just equalization.
I'll just say, that is 100% Ella. And that's important to highlight, that, we talk about 30 hours of interview, that it's probably 10 times that is the amount of time that Ella has spent with the edit of the audio. And I do very basic audio editing for some of my daily radio stories and things like that, and it's 2 tracks usually. How many tracks did you have for this one? Well, for a random episode?
Yeah, between 50 and 60 tracks per episode. So that's music, all of our interviews, any extra archival audio, sound effects, just room tone. Anytime we were at a field recording, we'd have to get at least a minute of room tone. I think that's actually a big part of why it sounds so smooth, because if we're recording somewhere where there's an air conditioner, if you just get the tone of the air conditioner and feed that through the whole thing, nobody notices the air conditioner because it's always there. But if you were to not have the air conditioner there, it would sound like every time they come back in. And aren't you glad you didn't have to hear that? But I don't remember the other part of the question. Was it just how long, or what's our process?
The production.
Yeah, we had scripts that we were sharing all the time, updating all the time, writing notes to each other, and actually, sometimes Becca would when we would do a cold read, she would put something funny in a line that I wouldn't realize until I read it out loud into the microphone.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I'm
yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah, just it takes a long time, and just for me, listening over and over and taking notes. I have just pages and pages in my notebook of just tiny things like, okay, mouth noise here, need to remove that. Somebody sniffs really loud here, need to remove that. So really tedious, meticulous stuff, but I love that stuff. I think it's a lot of fun.
We have another podcast celebrity coming to the mic. This is Sue Bills from episode 2. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
I just want to thank you guys for all the humor that, those of us that live through sewer backups, it's a painful time in our life, and I want to just thank you guys for making it so enjoyable to listen to what we can do in the future and work together. But my question is, how impactful were the individual stories that you interviewed that actually experienced it to the program? What kind of feedback did you get?
That's a really good question, and actually that's interesting that you asked that question, because that was one of the, I'm trying to remember if we entered, so the Florence Miller from episode 1 is also here. Those are the first 2 episodes there, and I can't remember if we interviewed Florence or Sue first, but either way, we did those kind of in a short period of time. And when we went to Sue's house and we kind of toured the basement, we saw the water lines where it used to come up, and just imagining how awful it would be to walk down and wade through poop water. And then we get to the end, and we were asking everybody this villain question, who's the villain? And Sue was like, well, it's nobody's fault, really, and we all just want to work together. And she talked about being a teacher and how she wanted that to be that cooperation. And it was really surprising to me. That was a moment that I won't forget easily. It was I'd be pissed if this happened to me. I'd be furious. And that's not to say that you didn't experience all of that. Obviously, we weren't there when it was actively flooding. It was after the fact. But I was amazed by all of the people who, I don't know, there were just too many moments to fit in there that it's Eric, for example, even talking about when a municipality somewhere upstream from us builds a development and sends it downstream, and that really sucks, and that causes a lot of work. And then he said, I know nobody's doing it maliciously, it's, they're just doing their jobs and they're not thinking about it. And we heard that over and over again, a hesitance to kind of point fingers. And, in some ways that made our job a little easier, because, we weren't making anybody mad, really. But I think that it was like a spirit of collaboration that I didn't quite expect, considering how contentious some of this has been. And that was really remarkable. But just in general too, like, you know, obviously I've not experienced a sewer backup, so it was really important to go to people's homes and see like, okay, what was that like? What did it practically mean? How much did it cost you? Like all of that kind of thing. And I think that was a huge part of what made this podcast listenable. Because, you know, if we're only talking to people who sit in offices and make decisions, like, you know, they could be the funniest person in the world, but it's still not going to be that interesting. You know, we need to know how it actually affects people.
And everyone that we interviewed in the podcast who had experienced sewer backup, I thought it was really interesting that they stayed in their home and actively worked to fix the problem in the community. And it speaks to the Cincinnati-ness of the podcast, I think.
I love that. Hi.
Hi, my name's Laura Boyd, and I'm actually an MSD employee. I've been there 3 years, and I just wanted to say you guys did such a great job. I wish this podcast would have came out when I started, because it took me 3 years to figure out all of the information that you guys have pieced together. And I think this is something, you know, MSD potentially could use in their new employee orientation.
Are you taking notes, Deb?
Yeah, Deb had to leave. But
oh, man.
I just want to say you guys did such a great job, and everything that you reported on was accurate, and I know a lot of time went into it, so thank you for doing that and highlighting such an important issue in our community. And also, I guess my question to you is, what is the most surprising or shocking thing that you took away from your research during this project?
Thank you so much. I mean, this might seem like boring or stupid, but I seriously was surprised by the combined sewer thing, because that was new to me.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah. Rainwater and poop going into the same pipe blew my mind. Like, I just never would have thought that, you know?
Yeah.
So that was a big moment for me. I remember, though, for Becca, like, and it's in the podcast, when Marilyn said, MSD's not a stormwater utility, that felt like a big, like, whoa moment, too.
And that was one of our first interviews, but it's still, like, that defined the rest of the podcast. Like, that was a key moment. That I was like, and it's funny because then when we wrote that episode and we got some feedback from folks in the newsroom, and they were like, why is it so surprising that MSD is not a stormwater utility? And the feedback we got was like, what is a stormwater utility? And we were like, okay, yeah, that's a really fair question, because, like, you know, usually with a utility, you pay Duke and they give you electricity, or you pay Greater Cincinnati Waterworks and they give you water. Are we paying for rain? Like, that's, you know, that doesn't make any sense, right? So then that was helpful to kind of rewrite it, but it was like, okay, the whole problem is stormwater. How is that not their job? Like, it was really shocking. I think we also put this in one of the bloopers, but it was like when Reese asked how many manholes are in the
that was a surprise.
Are in the system, and it was like
90,000.
90,000.
That's so many manholes. You guys are not surprised enough. I need you to bring it up.
We were like in the moment. There was all this energy, and he's like, "How many manholes do you think we have in the system?" We're like, "I don't know, 90,000." Yeah. Like it was really shocking information.
Like, how big is this city?
There were some other moments too where, like, you know, we worked a lot with KUFA, and there's folks from KUFA here tonight, and, you know, things that we didn't see in person, but, like, they talked about a rat coming up in someone's toilet, and that's just like in an active sewer backup, disgusting. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question.
A lot of the archival things we came across were
so
amazing
much
surprises.
fun.
Finding the sewer carols.
Oh, that was great.
Was one of the best moments of my life.
That was so good. So good.
Yeah, and that was really fun to put in the show.
Yeah, that, and, like, literally. So Marilyn mentioned the VHS in the first interview, which was in October of last year. I think the first episode had come out by the time she found the tape and said, "I'm gonna leave this at the office for you." And I was like, oh my God. I was hoping Marilyn was on it. She's not on it, which was very unfortunate. But, and I just so happened to have bought the, like, dongle from Amazon to digitize a bunch of home videos on my VCR, and that's exactly what I needed to digitize this. So I was like, this is fate. This is just fate. And then that 80s music comes in, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. I can't believe we get to use this. So that was pretty exciting.
There were definitely lots of moments where like Becca would call or text me, or I would call or text her. It'd be like, you wait till you see what I found. In respect to like the archival audio.
Yeah. It's 7:41. If we have a couple more questions, we can do a couple more. Otherwise, I think we'll probably wrap up. Anybody? Thank you so much for coming. This felt very much like a, an indulgent thing to just like sit here and talk about the thing I've been working on for, we've been working on for so long. And it is pretty important to recognize that it obviously wasn't just Ella and I. A lot of folks on the screen here are mostly just folks within our organization that helped work on this. There are many more outside of that. I mentioned Deb getting us all of the interviews we needed through MSD and also access to all of the documents and things we needed, which was great. Another celebrity here, the artist for our beautiful podcast artist here, Nicole Tiffany. So thank you so much for working so hard on that. We were thrilled with how that turned out, and I think it really just matched the vibe perfectly. So we're really happy about that. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for listening. I think probably most of the folks here were familiar with Cincinnati Public Radio before this podcast. That seems likely. But if not, and it's something that you are kind of new to us, just know that we do lots of other local news. I hope we do more podcast projects like this in the future, but our kind of bread and butter is local news. So yeah, thanks for coming. Do you have any final words?
Just thank you. If Cincinnati's a fictional town, then you guys are the magical fictional characters, and I'm so glad to have all of you here. It's really cool. We couldn't have done this if people weren't listening, so thank you.